Well, thank you, Hope, for leading us in those songs, and thank you so much for your prayer. And good morning, everyone. I greet you all in Jesus' name. Well, you'll see this morning that we're continuing the series that I am working on marriage. And this is the one I dreaded the most. But we'll see what happens. I'd like to begin with, as I did the others, a story of a prominent marriage. And I tried to find one and focus on one that showed the wife's part. And I've chosen to share about the marriage of D.L. Moody and Emma, his wife. D.L. Moody was called the Billy Graham of the 19th century, the 1800s. He was born in Northfield, Massachusetts in 1837 to a father that spent his money on drink and died bankrupt when Moody was 4 years old, leaving his wife Betsy to raise 9 children, of which Moody was one of the youngest. And so Moody grew up in a poor home, had a chance to, with very little education and a lot of hard work. And at 17, he headed for Boston and became a salesman in a shoe store. One day, a shoe salesman came in and befriended him and invited him to church, congregational church, and Moody was saved. Moody was an ambitious guy, and he moved to Chicago for business. And he attended a congregational church there, but some Sundays he would go to a Methodist church or a little Baptist mission nearby. And one Sunday, while visiting the Baptist mission, he spotted a young girl, Emma Revelle. She was 14 years old. She was teaching a Sunday school class, and she was pretty. She was also elegant, educated, a deep thinker, and pretty much the opposite of what Moody was. He was impulsive, outspoken, kind of a loudmouth, with little education and could be rather crude at times. Moody wasn't a teacher, so they put him in the job of going out into the streets and bringing kids in, and he was quite successful at that. But he got tired of Emma's church and how they did things. They were so formal that he decided he would start his own Sunday school, and he did. It was quite successful. At the high point of that Sunday school, he had over 1,500 students there, from children through adults. And he convinced Emma at one point to come and teach in his Sunday school. Well, at the same time, Moody was rather successful as a businessman also, as a salesman of shoes. And he was on his way actually to becoming a very wealthy man in the city of Chicago. But slowly, Moody's mind began to change. The Sunday school was becoming successful. He loved it. And his business started to fade. Business ambitions started to fade a little bit. And in that time, the Civil War started. And of all things, Moody declared himself a conscientious objector. He refused to go join the military, but that didn't keep him from military camps. He went there as an evangelist. And again, he was quite successful. He became known as the preacher that carried a bottle of whiskey, because he would go to men that were dying and he would give them a shot of whiskey so that they would revive, so that he could tell them about Jesus before they died. And he became known as Crazy Moody. During that time, he and Emma became engaged, of all things. And everybody that knew them could not believe what was happening to this couple. This man who was so successful, so in becoming wealthy, sort of chucked that to become a Sunday school teacher, and now he ends up with basically no job, and he's going to marry this elegant, educated girl. But it happened. Emma was a Baptist and Moody was a Congregationalist. And so they definitely had opposite views on baptism from infants to adults. As Moody's work was successful, he established a church out of his Sunday school work. And in the church, due to Emma's influence, there was a baptismal font and a baptistry. And that sort of pictures their marriage, but it was successful. There wasn't tension within that because Emma looked at herself as truly as Moody's helpmate. And she truly was. Moody, being the crude, uneducated, his preaching, his grammar was horrendous. In fact, he started out sort of as a fire and brimstone preacher, and he would say things like, God hates you sinners and he wants to just chop your heads off. And Emma would sit there but she slowly began to help him. And she told Moody, study the Bible. I think he was one of those preachers that could just preach, without the Bible almost. But she encouraged him, read the Bible, and he learned about the love of God, that God actually loves sinners. And it changed his preaching. She helped him in his grammar. She kept his books for him. She helped him control his temper. He was a guy that could just become angry quickly, and she helped him become in his manners more courteous. And he discovered her and found her to be a source of strength and comfort in his life, and very useful to her. Near the end of his life, he wanted to start a school, which he proceeded to do in Chicago. And at one point, the administration that had been hired and the board of directors, they were just at each other like cats and dogs. And Moody, he was just fed up with it. And he said, I'm done with it. It's not happening. And Emma, realizing what would happen, wrote a couple of letters, calmed things down, and Moody Bible Institute is with us still today, mainly because of Emma. Emma helped shape a man who changed the lives of millions. Now, I want you wives to hear that. As I gave you the story of Emma, Emma never joined Moody on the platform. She didn't want to. She was a quiet woman and a wife for Moody that affected him in such positive ways, so that Moody could affect others. Near the end of his life, Moody said of himself, I am the most overestimated man in America. And Emma is the most underestimated woman. Moody died. It took the spark out of Emma, and she followed him in death 2 years later. So that's Moody and Emma, their story. The good wife. Proverbs 18:22. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. Thus my title, The Good Wife. A wife is a woman married to a man. I think that statement's pretty important in these times. It's a legal, intimate union of a man and woman for life. In Genesis, God creates a wife for Adam, suitable for Adam. He didn't create a soulmate. He didn't create a friend. He didn't create a mother. Poor Adam, he didn't have a mother, so we need to give him, he didn't do that. He did not create another man. He created a wife. Now, perhaps they became soulmates. Maybe they got to be friendly. I don't know what happened to them. We're not told. But she definitely was his wife. Adam and Eve. Now, since that time, much of culture has determined what wifery looks like. What does it mean to be a wife? And we could go through the Old Testament. We don't have time for that right now. What it meant to be a wife through the Old Testament. But when we come to the advent of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the beginning of the church, there seems to be in the New Testament a need for a clarification of a Christian wife's place and work. And I want to look at that a little bit this morning the best I can. A young wife told me recently, not from this congregation, that she thinks that Disney films is one of the worst things that has ever happened to young girls with all this happily ever after stuff. It gives the wrong expectations of marriage. But with that, I would say it may, but it does not do away with the possibilities that are so good in marriage and the place of being a wife. I want this to be positive because God views it as very positive. But with saying that, I want to recognize that there can be great pain in the lives of wives and difficulties. So I recognize that also. Before we leave the Old Testament, our text comes from Proverbs, and Proverbs is called the book of wisdom. The greatest caution that the book of wisdom gives wives, and you may have guessed it, is the contentious wife. I want to just address that before we move on. What makes the contentious wife warning sound like wisdom? Well, I think probably it's the potential destructiveness of such a wife because of how important wifery is. It can be very destructive not only to the marriage and the family, but to the church and, as we see, society. The importance of a good wife. What is contentious? What does it mean to be contentious? Well, if you go and study it as best I could from the originals and all that stuff, it means to have a contest. And we would say butt heads. Who's in charge? Who's going to have the power ultimately? You're quarreling. One said you're brawling, which you can picture that. Strife, debate. It's just a power struggle, this contentiousness of who's going to have their way. Chapter 19, verse 13, and I'll add things in as the Amplified Bible does. A nagging, quarrelsome, contentious wife is like a constant dripping. 21:19. Better to live in a desert than with a nagging, quarrelsome, contentious, and complaining, ill-tempered, angry wife. Chapter 27, verse 15 and 16. A nagging, quarrelsome wife is like a constant or a continual dripping on a rainy day. Quieting, restraining, or hiding her is like trying to hide or restrain the wind, or grasping oil with the hand, which I believe means relationally. You know, the whole, if you try to grasp oil out of water, you can't. Such is a contentious wife. Now that sounds pretty terrible, doesn't it? The description. But I think wisdom tells us that such a wife, the reason is because a wife's job is so important, and one that is contentious in these ways is very destructive. The destruction that can come is just so terrible. Well, by saying that, I want to come back, though, because there can be an overreaction here. A husband does not want a contentious wife, but he wants one that does contend. You understand? And a wife that does not contend with her husband is not being a good wife. So you do not become a doormat. You do not just shut up and sit in the corner. You contend with your husband. That's how you be a good wife. There are two classic fears that men have, you wives. One is being controlled by a woman. And so these are things that a man thinks of when he thinks of his wife being contentious. It's the old ball and chain thing that you hear people joke about. That's one of man's fears. Another fear that he has is that somehow he will be inadequate. He won't be a man. And I take from those two fears that, wow, that describes what the job of a good wife is. One that helps her. She's not controlling him. She's supporting him. She's helping him. She's encouraging him. And she's not looking at him as inadequate, but she helps him to be a man. And learn to contend and do that in healthy ways. Okay, that's the contention thing out of Proverbs that I wanted to say. The preacher Martin Lloyd-Jones, my wife is my best and severest critic. And he says that in a positive way, as does Billy Graham. My wife is my most important critic. Bible translator J.B. Phillips, my wife is my finest critic. A good wife helps make a man. Okay, I have 3 points. They are acceptance, adaptation, and appreciation. Let's go. If I go back to our text that I used for the husband, Ephesians 5, and I said there are 13 verses there. They all speak to the man except 2.5 verses speak to the wives. 2 of the verses say submit. One of them says, the half verse says respect. Acceptance. Picture this. A group of girls are together and they're giggling and laughing again, like I said, and one of them says, do you know, Billy asked me out on a date. And they go, oh, yeah, what did you say? And then she says, I said yes. A while later, they're all together again, giggling and laughing. This time, a little bit more serious, but still very happy. Billy just asked me to marry him. What did you say? I said yes. When's the wedding? And on it goes. The wedding day comes. And this is what the preacher asks the girl. Will you take this man to be your wedded wife? I'm sorry. Will you take this man to be your wedded husband? Will you love, listen you guys, will you love, cherish him in health and in sickness, in prosperity and in adversity, share with him the joys and sorrows of life, exercising patience, kindness, and forbearance toward him, and live with him in peace, as becometh a faithful Christian wife, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only unto him, as long as you both shall live. And what does she say? Yes, I will. And she takes his name. Now, do you see a pattern of acceptance all through that? She said, yes, yes, yes. Give me your name. Yes. The acceptance is a part of the role of a good wife. You're a helper. You're a lover. You're an encourager. You accept this man. Yes, you're equal in God's eyes, but you take on different rules. When you said, yes, I will, you became a wife. A wife. Your husband becomes the most important person in the world to you. As it says, until death do you part. Quite a job. And as a man, I'm amazed that any woman says it. I mean, yeah. We don't have time again this morning, but we could turn to 1 Corinthians 11, where it says God, man, woman, so forth. And some have called that the chain of command, and I think that is very unfortunate words. It's not a chain of command, you guys. It's a chain of mutual submission and respect. And we can't go into that. But because in Proverbs 31:23, where it describes the good wife, it says there that this man is known as the husband of this woman, this wife. And to me, that's a very positive thing. For someone to say, there's Rob. You know his wife is Bethany? Bethany's up here. Rob's here. This is his wife. That's the good picture of the good wife. That's what Proverbs is saying there. And so, but she making him that, she is good. As she accepts him, and you wives know this, a man has an ego. It's just how God created him. We all have a little bit of Trump in us. Some more than others, but we do. And so we can be very self-important and self-centered. You know, we're the man, blah, blah, blah. Well, a good wife will just curb that ego a little bit, but she will build his self-esteem. She will work at listen, this is who you are, and it's good. You don't need to flaunt that ego around me, or, you know. All men are a little conceited. You know, we all have a little bit of this will show my age, and I don't know much about this character, but I just laugh every time I see it. You remember the Fonz? You know, he had this cigarettes rolled up in his sleeve. He's like the most, he's totally conceited. Well, men are a little bit like that also, you know, but as you deal with our conceit, don't smash our hopes and dreams along with it. You know, help that come along too. And we all want to be known as men at some level. So help us be men. We can all be either kind of crude at times or maybe too passive or whatever. But try to help us be good men. And to do that, you need to accept us. A good wife accepts her man. A warning to you wives also. I read this, and I think it's probably true. A warning to a wife who thinks she's better than her husband, smarter than her husband, and so forth. Listen to this. A wife who thinks she's smarter than her husband is a disgusting creature. I read that and I thought, wow, yeah. It shows huge unacceptance of her man. Adaptation or submission. I don't know. I hope you guys have patience with me this morning. I have a couple of illustrations that I want to give. And I want you to meet Sally and John. They're a farm couple. Sally is having problems. How can I get my husband to change? John will just not face up to his inefficiencies in farming and do something about it. The first year we got married, we had a gross income or a net income of $500. And there was no disasters. It was just from his normal farming practices. And in 8 years, not much has changed. I started reading farm magazines and getting online and learning about what's the better way to raise pigs. Finally, I decided to allow John to give me 1 pen of pigs for me to raise my way. And he did. And those pigs went to market earlier and they got the best price. Was John impressed? No. In fact, his pen, 10 pigs died, I think, from malnutrition. And I told John, look, if you spend a little bit more for a feed, it'll pay out at the end. He didn't care. He spends hours reading literary magazines, which we can't afford, but he won't read articles on how to feed pigs better. Now, don't blame our problem on the lack of communication. My husband and I have no problem with that. Incidentally, John has many fine qualities. He's far superior to me intellectually. He speaks well. He's good with the children. He's friendly with the neighbors. But all of this doesn't provide income. Can anyone blame me for nagging? So my second point, submission. Adaptation, which is submission. That word can repulse us, but actually it's a way, it leads us to the way of Jesus. 1 Corinthians 11:8-9. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. I didn't write that, you guys. That's God's word. What does it mean for a Christian wife to submit, to adapt to her husband as one that God created for him? Adapt yourself to your husband as a helper, as a counselor, as a navigator sometimes of life. Recognize your position. When I think of submission, sometimes we think of that word in such a negative way, but every one of you, when you leave this place, you get out on 312, every one of us are going to submit. We're going to submit to white lines, a yellow line and a white line. As we jokingly said to Conrad at times, I'll just keep it between the ditches. You know, you are submitting. You are submitting to the signs that say there's a sharp curve ahead. You submit to speed limits. That's submitting, and it saves your life many times. That's the picture that I want you to have of a wife submitting to her husband. It's just taking your place. It's taking the order that God has made. It's getting things in proper alignment. Respecting, honoring, adapting, submitting to one's personality, one's gifts, one's abilities, one's income, one's interests. Submitting yourself to that. But just as I introduced this message, you are going to be a contender in this submitting. I think one of the illustrations that I'd like to use comes from Corinthians again, Corinthians 14, where Paul warns the wives not to speak in church, and that's another whole thing. But he tells them when you hear a preacher come in, and I fully expect and ask you to do this, wives, when you get home today, ask your husband, what do you think about what Rob said? Was that true? Talk about it. Mike and I have talked about this various times. You know, a preacher can come here and preach from 1,000 miles away, and he can say the same thing that Mike and I say, and you just think he's the best thing in the world. That happens. That also happens in a husband and wife situation. And Paul is saying, listen, you wives, don't think that Rob knows it all. You go back home and you ask your husbands. You see what you're doing to your husband? You're elevating him, you're adapting, you're putting yourself, you're submitting to what he says. And again, you may contend some with that, but you are submitting, you're giving him an opportunity to voice his opinion and thoughts. Ask yourself, wives, how do I complete my husband? Who is he? And how do I fit in with him? How do I understand and support my husband? How do I help him fulfill his God-given potential? Back to John and Sally. Now they're out feeding cattle. You're driving a full load of hay to feed cattle. Your husband is perched on the load in the back, on the top of the load of hay, and he hammers on the cab roof, and you don't know what he wants, so you slam on the brakes. And here he comes over the front with the hay bales. You have three options. You turn up the radio and say you didn't hear what he was saying, or you shout out the window, is this where you wanted the load? Or you cry. And actually, you guys, crying is better than yelling. Now, you can never do that, but sometimes crying, a wife's cry, literal cry, can be very communicative to the husband. So I don't know what Sally did here, but she had that option. So we are going to accept our husband. We're going to work at adapting to him and helping him. And then we're going to learn to appreciate him. John and Sally again. You're ready to leave for town. This is Sally. When he reminds you that he needs parts picked up at John Deere. And you better write it down, he says, or you'll forget. And that angers you. What do you think I can't remember? Don't you trust me? A couple hours later, you find yourself back at home and you've forgotten them. What's your options? Drive 20 miles back to the John Deere? Suggest that he get his own parts? Or do you apologize and say, I'll get them the first thing in the morning? What does it mean to appreciate or respect your husband? And I'll say you can do that in conduct and conversation, in words. What does it mean to submit and respect your husbands? And the definition that comes up, again, it's like submission. It's to reverence your husband. You know, that sounds so, he's not God. Why would you reverence him? Or fear him? Or revere him? You know, like you're saying, man, who does he think he is? Or how, well, I think basically just to respect is to show appreciation for and recognize who he is. Again, a woman has the power to make a man come alive. You can see that, I was going to say every day, hopefully not every day, but you probably can, in the whole adulterous affair thing. Why in the world would a man leave his wife and go to another woman? This is it, folks. Because another woman basically appreciates him. Something that you could do, but apparently he's not feeling it in some way. And I'm not justifying the husband at all, of course. But there's something that this woman is providing, and I'm guessing that it's basically respect and appreciation for who he is. It's the whole dynamics of being a cheerleader. Rah, rah, rah. You know, the basic high school cheerleader. That's kind of it in a nutshell, really. But here's this girl jumping up and down and shouting for this guy. You know, and he's running for the goalpost because this girl back there, man, it just puts some fire in him. And you guys, it does work. I remember years ago he was a Mennonite evangelist, and he had this big tent, and they were tearing it down, and they needed guys to work it. And he said, I need a bunch of young guys in here to do this, and I need a bunch of girls to watch. Because he knew the fire that he would get out of those guys when that happened. It just happened. And you wives are in that position with your husbands. He needs your approval. He needs your encouragement. And again, there's a difference between these two. There's a difference between manipulation and motivation. And think about that one a while. Don't have time to go into that one either. But he wants your approval. He wants you to rejoice and compliment him on his achievements and what he's trying to do. Nobody comes ahead of your husband. You're one. Your life is in that union. Now, as I close, I'm just going to go through a little bit of a list here. Some of these you're going to identify with, and some of them he's in left field. Be supportive of his work and try to understand it and be able to talk intelligently about it. Now, some of you wives are a lot more involved in participating in the work, and that's that. But there's differences. But at least know what your husband's doing. Be able to talk intelligently about it. I remember when I was a mail carrier, it was so fun to talk to Bethany about my route. And sometimes we'd go to drive, and she said, let's drive your mail route, and you tell me about some people. And I would do that. She learned to know the people I worked with. Especially, I really tried to work at her meeting the other women I worked with. She knew a number of them. And I would always try to talk respectfully, I think I always did, of Bethany in the workplace. And I always used her name. Yeah, know what he's doing. Help what you can. Be his wife, but don't be so possessive. Don't be jealous. No husband is loved more by his wife being jealous. In fact, it can be very destructive. No husband has become more trustworthy because you mistrust him. Well, those can be some hard things to get through, but those are just, I think, truths. No husband likes a nagging wife. Now, sometimes, and I tell Bethany that, and this can be an excuse, but most husbands need to be told more than once. It's just how we are. Now, that can go to extreme, I know. But wives, be patient with your husband. Sometimes we need to be told more than once about something. It's kind of how we are. It's God's fault. So don't be possessive. Don't be so demanding. Don't be so jealous of him that you're not functioning in a healthy way. Never, this is a big one, you wives, never criticize him in public. Don't make jokes about him in public. Don't compare him to other men. Don't make him the butt of a joke. Don't bring up he's the reason we failed in this. And make fun of him. But compliment him to others and to the children. Acknowledge him, show confidence in him, and do it verbally. Value his opinion, laugh at his jokes, spend time with him. Here's one. This one is important to me, so I don't know about the rest of you guys. But touch is important to me. I love it when Bethany sits next to me, touching me. I love to hold her hand. I love to when she puts her arm in mine. I like that. It just makes me feel like a man. This is my wife. And it makes me feel good. So maybe some men aren't like that, but I am. Touch is important to me. See, it shows that she's recognizing me as someone of value that she wants to be with. Let's see. Beauty, outward beauty, wear what he likes sometimes. Work on inner beauty, that quiet and humble, meek, but yet spirit that will contend with your man. I just want to keep coming back to that because sometimes I fear that wives are too cautious because they don't want to be the contentious wife. So they fail to really healthily contend with their husband. But do some things that he likes, that he enjoys. Here's another big one. Watch where you get your input on what marriage is to be. On life and marriage. Where do you get your input? It takes me back to the preacher that I said you can hire a preacher from 1,000. He'll come here and tell you have a good marriage, and you think, wow, that's really powerful stuff. And you go home and you speak to your husband about that. Where are you getting your information about what is good, a good marriage, or what goes on in life? Because you all know there are millions of opportunities out there for that. Create a home of harmony, of order, good food, your presence, and your loyalty to him. And above all, pray for him. Now, back to John and Sally. John has just come in from the barn again late for supper, but he has a good reason. There was a sick calf and he had to take care of it, and Sally knows such things come, but John comes in to the kitchen and he goes over to Sally. He puts his arms around her and says, I love you. How does Sally respond? Doesn't everybody? As she brushes it off. Or, then how come da-da-da-da-da? Or she turns around, returns the hug, and says, I love you too. So that's John and Sally's life and marriage. In closing, you wives could be sitting there, okay, fine and dandy. You don't know our marriage, and I don't. But listen, wives, and perhaps you're even afraid a little bit about what submission and appreciation, what it might mean to adapt to this person. Perhaps you could just begin by taking some part and say, I'm going to submit in this, whatever you work out that submission is. I'm going to do it. That's a start. That's a start. And that's really all I'm asking of you this morning. Be willing to start Wherever you're at in this journey in your marriage of acceptance and adaptation and appreciation, just start at some point, and you all have, but how can I broaden this? How can I make this more healthy in our marriage? With that, recognize the seasons of a marriage. And again, we don't have time to talk about that, but certainly Bethany and I's marriage, I've seen changes, from newly married to children, teenage children coming and gone, children married, empty nest. All those are can be different dynamics for a marriage. So recognize those times of marriage and accept them. So I was doing my research for this. I ran across a woman, and I don't know what I think about this, but she said she just took a 30-day challenge. She said, for 30 days, I didn't correct him, criticize him, or try to change any of his decisions. 30 days. And in her case, she says it turned out really good. Now, I don't know. Anyway, that's my stab at the good wife. Accept him. Work at adapting to him. And in that adaptation, you're going to submit, because you're going to contend with him and make him a better man. And then show appreciation in whatever ways are meaningful to him and you. And give thanks for your husband. As I think about the marriages at Turkey Run, I think I can say this at least about them to you wives. Give thanks for a good husband. He chose you. He provides for you. He prays. He goes to church. He loves your children. And he wants to please you. I think I can say that for every marriage. Man, if you have a husband that even fulfills those things, you're blessed. So as a good wife, take that and build on it. Perhaps you can read again, think about the marriage of Moody and Emma and others. You guys, a wife is a good thing. A good thing. A very good thing. So bless you. Let me pray. Fathers, we've looked at this scripture this morning, and we believe with the proverb that a wife is a very good thing. Father, I thank you for the wives that you provided for the men of this congregation. And Father, how you are preparing young women from this congregation to be good wives. And I just pray for each marriage today, as we've thought through different things, Lord, that you would speak to us and help us to learn to accept each other and adapt to each other and appreciate each other, that we would truly show forth the true Christian marriage to this world. I just pray your continued blessing on each one. I ask in Jesus' name, amen.